Hi, everyone. This is Bob,
And this is Archie.
and this is Bob and Archie talk about life in high tech. Today, we're going to talk about usability and user experience. Before we get into that, let's give a little history about all this. So, what is usability? Well, by definition, it's like something that's very easy to use, which is something that software usually isn't. Now, going back to history, engineers developed software and computers for other engineers and technicians, and there was that level of understanding. Of course, we've evolved way past that. And as things started to get sold to people who had less experience, documentation, for one thing, to explain how things were. The original user interface, we'll call it, was nothing more than entering commands at a prompt and understanding the programming languages, and if you didn't understand that, you didn't get too far. And then that got a little simpler. Eventually, we went to a graphic design, which is the visual interface. And where we are today with your cell phones, you can see everything visually. You don't have to put much in. You press here, talk there, do all sorts of things. But that took a long time to develop. And as documentation people, we were a part of that. We would go along, document the things that we needed to do, and then start incorporating more of that experience and knowledge into the product itself. Now, I also want to point out, history wise, the internet. The internet was all command based. It was just lines. You had to know what to enter. Along came the World Wide Web, which is on the internet. It's not the internet itself. And that was more of a graphic user interface that we know and love today. Oh, maybe not love it.
Well, just to give a historical point, I remember the first version of Dungeons and Dragons was all command line, where you're typing in a line and then it would answer you with a line of text. There were no pictures at all.
Oh, yeah. And then the next step of that is
Yeah.
that they would use dashes and plus symbols to draw out little pictures. You are in this room. And it's
Okay,
the
and
silliest
I
thing.
have to tell the story that way back when at AT&T, the older guys, and this is at a time when I was a young guy. Now I'm an older guy, but the
Yes,
older
you are.
guys would basically print out nude pictures with using the lines and dashes on a dot matrix printer and pass those around. So yeah,
Shocking.
nudity is important no matter what kind of tools you have.
Shocking behavior. These things actually happened in previous generations. I'm stunned, really. Well, moving
Uh,
on from that. So here we are with more a visual representation of what we do, which makes life as a technical writer a little more interesting. But we don't consider ourselves technical writers, do we? We're information developers. We are user experience analysts. So
and I will just okay. So historically, just get going back to the whole history of usability. I mean, it was kind of one of these disciplines that PhDs in psychology were talking about human behavior, and it started out as human factors, which was basically man-machine interface, and that was the secondary definition of human factors, man-machine interface. So you have this big piece of hardware, and how does this person interact with that hardware? So that's how things started. Everything that was designed, whether it was industrial equipment or space shuttle or all that stuff, somebody had to sit there and figure out, okay, where should we put these switches so that it's accessible and makes sense. Okay, and so that's how it started, human factors. Then using your historical point of going from command line to graphics, then it became kind of a graphical user interface design where same people, the same PhDs were now looking at how people. I mean, I remember going to one of these tests where they're looking through a one-way mirror and they're watching somebody use something and they're watching their eyes. Where are they looking? You know, and so that tells them where to put buttons and things like that. So it's the most efficacious. And then and now I think what we're evolving into is this. They call it UX, user experience, which theoretically should encompass the UI plus all the peripherals associated with that product. So, it's the software interface, it's the training, it's the user, it's the documentation, it's the online help, it's the support, it's everything. Now I tend to look at it that way. I think there aren't that many companies that have gotten to the point where they've evolved to include everything. Documentation is still something that happens like over there, and they don't necessarily. The training organization is usually a stovepiped organization that's again over there.
A separate piece.
Yeah, so they still haven't gotten to the point where they're integrating all of it. But the fact that they're even using the word user experience means that at least they're thinking the right way.
Yes, and some companies are doing it, but they're forward thinking, and it's great to see.
Yeah.
But still, we don't believe in the separation of all these different groups. We all work together. I mean, even support.
Right.
It's part of the user experience. You know,
Right.
something goes wrong, you call up support. Your experience with that support technician is part of your overall experience with the product.
And this is why I say that most companies really haven't gotten there yet, because you buy a product, it's great, you have a problem, you call up tech support, and you've got people in India and China and other places who are reading a checklist. Oh, is it plugged in? Did you do this? Did you do that? And it's like, no. And if
They're not well trained.
Exactly. And if that experience is poor, you now have a very poor impression of that product.
Absolutely.
So,
And so we've seen the evolution over our career from these command line experiences to more graphical interfaces. And then now we include voice. I mean, you click your microphone on. I've gotten used to it now. I'll click the microphone and talk a text message.
I notice you do that. I'm just starting to do that, trying it anyway, because most of the time it doesn't understand me or it gets the words wrong. But I notice a lot of people are starting to do that more and more often.
I could tell you some funny stories about what I said and then what was printed, but I don't think it's for the general audience.
Yeah.
I mean, I think some of these voice things have dirty minds, but that's okay.
Absolutely.
Now we're getting a bit off topic. So anyways, we've lived through all this, and we've seen the graphical user interface. We've seen things get better. We've seen button placements, and now we're more concerned with what are you seeing? How do you think it should react when you do something? What is the response that you expect to see? And so we try to incorporate that in our jobs today.
And I think that the PhD psychologists are still around, but they're very they become less pivotal or less important as we go on. It's like everybody sort of is concerned with usability at higher levels and lower levels. And the PhD guys really only come in at the very beginning, especially when hardware is concerned and in medical devices. You really got to have, in medical device companies, they actually bring the surgeons in and have them play with prototypes.
Exactly.
And listen to them say, oh, well, this could be better. And this could, most doctors do this and most doctors do that. And we need to, and it's really, really fun to listen to these guys because, doctors are doctors, they're gods, right? So when they speak, they expect you to listen. And of course we do. So it's great.
Yes, I've had those experiences too. And then they say, well, why can't I do this? And the product could do that, but in one particular instance, but I just had to document how to. But it was nice to know what they needed and why they needed it. Again, these are our experiences so far, and we're going to be telling some stories about that.
Absolutely. I guess we've been talking sort of at the broad level of usability, but usability is so it pervades the entire production development process. I mean, I tell one story is about something little. Okay, so I'm doing an installation guide. And the installation team, as part of their redesign of the installation interface.
This is for a software product.
This is a software product. It's
Yeah.
an operating system.
Yeah, how to stick it onto your machine.
Right. So in the process of redesigning this thing, they changed something called inode density. Okay. Now, I grew up in the Unix world. I spent my first 10 years of my career in a Unix shop. And in all that time, I'd never heard inode density. I'm like, what the hell is this?
Hey, how many out there have heard of inode density?
Yeah, exactly. So
Give us a call.
So I started looking around, and in the Unix documentation, operating system documentation tends to be quite extensive. So I was just working on installation. So there were several volumes of data around this, and so I finally, did a search and found the one book in the volumes of books that mentioned inode density. And I said, oh, okay, so this is a real thing. Okay. So I called up the writer who owned that book, somebody else, and I said, hey, the team here is changing the inode density. You might want to mention it in your book. And I never gave it another thought because I said, no installer is going to know what inode density is, and they're not going to care. In fact, if I mention inode density in the installation guide, they're going to do what I did. what the hell is I know density? And they'll just be confused. So that's, again, that detracts from usability. So, but, you know.
Well, let's go to
Yeah.
that point. It detracts from usability because it gives you information that is distracting.
Right.
Okay.
It has
and
nothing
it's
to
not
do with
important
yeah,
to what you're doing.
exactly.
You got to stick to the point. What's important is getting these things installed.
And the problem with a lot of engineering groups, because this is what happened, you know, an engineering manager comes to me, well, wait a minute, you can't just slough that off from another book. It needs to be an installation guide. And so, of course, me being me,
Archie has that look.
Yes.
You know, when he does that.
so the next time, so when we're in an engineering meeting. And so the engineering manager's there, the lead engineer, and a bunch of other engineers are all in the room, and me. And, you know, they decide to bring up this I know density thing. And so I'm like, okay, look. So I asked the question. This is my style. I question. I said, so wait a minute. Does changing the I know density affect the installation of any of our applications? No. Does changing the I know density affect the installation of any third-party applications? No. And, and so the lead engineer, who happened to be sitting next to me in the meeting, he leans over to me and says, well, I get your point. Meaning that, you know, this is a dead issue. Leave it alone. You were right. That's it.
Yes.
And that's the point. It's kind of like, it's a little thing, but again, if you put it in the installation guide, the poor installer who's just trying to get this thing onto a system and get it working, and all of a sudden they're introduced to a topic that has nothing to do with installation and they don't even understand what it is, and then I'd have to spend pages explaining what the hell I know density is, right? So,
And that's part of usability as far as sticking to the point, you know, getting a job done, installing the software.
Right.
Okay. And
Right.
cutting out the extraneous and confusing information. And that is part of usability in the overall user experience. That's the point of that story.
Yeah, and the other point is that it's something that, you know, I'm not a usability engineer, but I just know that this would be confusing. And so it's my job to make sure that we keep it usable and understanding that this is not the right thing to do. We need to do something else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In fact, just recently in one of my contracts, I was given an installation guide, or a deployment guide in this case, was simply installing some software onto a customer's network so it can do some monitoring for them. And the guide, as presented to me, had wonderful information about how great it was, how it compares to other products, and it's based on this technology, and links to go to take a look at that technology to see how great it is. I cut it all out. I just said, you know, we don't need this. I go, this is a deployment guide. They've already bought it. The poor person who's got to install this had no say whether we bought it or not, and doesn't care how great it is. I just got to get it into my network. And he was a little bit shocked that I said that. And I go, I threw him a bone. I said, but it's very nice information.
Yeah.
I go, if I do an overview guide, I'll put it in there, okay?
Well, one of my projects, it was kind of a side project. I had a full-time job, but I also had this side project where I was as a consultant to another company. They had a user guide that was, I don't know, 300 pages or whatever, but it was written by marketing. So all throughout the thing is, you know, they've got all the advantages and all that marketing fluff in this book that's kind of made it big and kind of made it convoluted. And so they were actually getting complaints about that manual. So that's why I came in. And so that was the same sort of thing. I'm cutting out all the marketing stuff, getting direct to the point. Just, you know, at this point, they've already bought the product, so they don't need to know how great it is. They know how they bought it because they know it's great. Now they just really want to know how to use it. So I cut all that, same thing, cut all that stuff out, reduced the size of the book a little bit. And also, the other thing that was really weird, because when I was being interviewed for the job, the first thing I said to him, I said, well, did you ever do a usability study on the hardware? He goes, oh, yeah. And she pulls out this big binder of a usability study. It's like, okay, then I'm all set. You know, I don't need to talk to you anymore. Because basically they did the usability study, and all I needed to do was follow the usability study, because all the personas were defined, all the things that people, you know, this group needs this group needs that, you know. And so I wrote the book based on that.
Okay.
I rewrote the book based on that.
Well, you said an important word, persona. Okay.
Yes,
And
define that.
can you explain that?
Yes. Okay. So, in the medical device world, and I think this is true in any technology world, there's usually more than one audience for a particular product. So in the medical device world, you know, you've got the surgeons who have certain needs. You've got the perfusionists, the people who do the blood work. You've got the people who do sterilization, which is usually another audience. And so each of those people represents a persona that's defined in when they do usability studies. Those are the first things to define. Okay, who are the audiences for this product? Who is going to use it?
Yes.
And in the case of this medical device, there were at least 5 different personas. So I had to split up the book and wrote specific information for each persona.
Right, because they each have a different need, a different type of information that they need to look at to do their job.
Exactly.
And so the point of what we're doing, we just talked about, is really knowing your audience, knowing what they need, and sticking to exactly what they need and getting them to do the job quickly. I can tell you, nobody likes to read a manual.
Right. Right.
I've made my living off writing manuals that most people don't read, which is great. I make money off that. It's wonderful. But still, by keeping it focused and telling them exactly what to do, they read it, they get it done, everything's fine.
Well, one of the funny things about, again, with the medical devices is that you would think that, okay, you're writing this for the surgeon. Nope. The surgeon actually knows how to do surgery. All our product is doing is helping that surgeon do the surgery a little bit more efficiently. So the surgeon actually gets the least amount of information in a manual.
I can see that.
Yeah, because it's kind of like all we're doing. Because okay, so in a hospital setting, there's a person or a group of people who brings the equipment into the surgical theater, sets it up, plugs it in, makes sure that it's working. Then there's another group that comes in and calibrates it to make sure that it's accurate. And then there's another group of people who monitor the thing. So all the surgeon really has to do, and another group that comes in actually and sterilizes all the instruments that the surgeon's going to use with the product. And so the only thing that the surgeon needs to know is, okay, what button do I need to push to start this thing? and that kind of thing. It's really very, very basic because the surgeon knows what he or she is doing. They don't need our help for that, but they don't know how to use this to do what they know how to do.
Yes, and we have no idea how to do surgery, so we'll leave it to them. We're not going to tell them what to do.
Exactly.
I think which is a great idea.
Exactly.
All right, I'm going to change the topic a little bit, and one of the usability experiences I've had was pretty unique in a way. As user interfaces, what you see on the screen became more visual, more graphic. We had illustrators and what we call graphic designers come in and start doing the user interface. Now, I was working at one company that hired this graphic consultant, and he designed a beautiful looking interface. They gave him some direction, and when he came in, it was drop dead gorgeous. It was so nice. It didn't do anything that the product did. Nothing. It was completely useless.
Wow.
Yeah, we could have taken a picture of it and hung paintings up on it, but that was about it. And I was instrumental in saying, I don't think we need this person anymore. Which I'm sure he appreciated that, but
did they actually let him go?
Yeah, well, he's a contractor like me.
Oh wow, okay.
But and I got a graphic illustrator in, a graphic designer in, and a person that you talked about, somebody who actually worked in the field where we were targeting the product. It was clinical software.
Okay.
And so she worked in clinical trials, and so she knew what they were doing. I had a graphic illustrator who could do these wonderful designs, but based on real tasks. And so I was the one that was actually looking to design and putting it all together. So the three of us made a team, and with the skill sets of each of us, we came up with this with this really very practical, very focused user interface that actually kept the company going for a while. The company eventually went out of business for other reasons, but not because of the user interface we defined.
Right.
So again, the user interface and usability was making all the pieces work together so it flows nicely. If I do something, if I press a button or I enter a field or I hit enter, the software has got to react to that in a way that I expect it to, and then gives me the proper information or the expected behavior. Or if it can't, it tells me why, so I can do something else. Yeah. And that's usability.
Exactly. And I'm trying to think of examples where people outside of the usability realm were actually making good suggestions that aided usability. It's kind of like, you probably cut this out, but I was ruminating about people who were not in the path of usability making usability suggestions, and I couldn't think of any stories, but maybe you have one. Because technical writers, we as technical writers are normally ignored when it comes to most things, but if we can tie it to usability, and if we can tie it to the benefit of the product and the user, some people will listen.
Okay.
And then this goes back to the whole idea of presenting the same idea more than one way. So if the first time you you give a usability example and they ignore you, you have to come back again and tie it to whatever's important to them, to say, hey, we need to do it this way because it's going to help these people. So, yeah.
Well, one of the key things in usability is knowing the audience. And that means talking to them. Now, in your case, you talk to surgeons and nurses, and as have I, but of course, we have products for other people too. I've gone out to customer environments, where they sit and use the product, and then not only talk to them to discuss what they need and how things are going wrong and how things are going right, but also to observe. I think it's human nature. You can say one thing and you're believing it. In the meantime, your hands, your eyes, and stuff are doing something different.
Right.
And so capturing all that is part of the user experience. And then knowing what they're going to be doing, even when they're not aware of it, and then fulfilling that.
Well, actually, there was one test. Actually, you good point. There was one test that we did, again, medical devices. And all we were doing, we were testing one little segment. Okay, so this device is a surgical, a robot-assisted surgery kind of thing. It's really complex. But what we were testing, this one little thing, we were testing setup, because what it was is that we had an imaging system, and we were redesigning the imaging system so that you could attach this robot arm and just increase the value and the efficacy of the imaging system. So we were just testing the idea of taking this new arm and mounting it on your imaging system and getting it working. So just that one little thing. So we were bringing in the technicians to come in and do that. And one of the funny things is, okay, so the robot arm weighed about 100 pounds or something like that. So obviously you couldn't pick it up because it's a delicate piece. And you had to mount it on this thing. So they designed this whole cart where you can, raise the thing up to the right level and push it in and then click it together and all this other stuff. And what we discovered in this one little test is that, okay, so the cart had a one-hand crank, okay? And so, yeah, if you're, 6 foot tall and 200 pounds, that one-handed crank, no problem. But, we had technicians who were like 5 foot nothing and weighed 90 pounds. And no, they couldn't do it. So we had to redesign that whole cart to account for these smaller people.
Yeah, all part of usability.
Exactly.
Understanding what's really going on. I think one of my very early experiences in Honeywell was my very first professional job was that I had to do, everything was more hardware oriented. So I had to take this complete huge system out of a box. So they set it up on the manufacturing floor. And they said, okay, this thing's packaged. What we're going to do is unpackage it in front of your face, and I'm going to participate, and we're going to take it all out. We're going to roll it out. We're going to put it together. We're going to do this. We're going to plug it in. And it was a great experience. And I wrote everything up. And then one of the customer support guys, who has actually been to real sites, said, yeah, it doesn't work that way. Because we don't have that kind of space that you have on the manufacturing floor.
There you go.
And it's just like, wow, that was key. Now I understood the audience that much better. And then we enclosed the space and then said, oh, no, we can't just, open that up. It's not easy.
Yeah.
It was also forced a redesign of how they packaged it. So again, another usability story.
Yeah, it's amazing what you learn just by watching people do stuff. I mean, when I first started getting into medical devices, they had me go out to a teaching hospital and watch a surgery, right? And that was fascinating because you watch the movies and there's always this dim lights and it's nothing like that. Okay.
No soap opera things,
Yeah.
Oh, doctor, you've been going out with me for 3 years now. When are you going to tell your wife?
I mean, it's the thing that impressed me was that the poor surgeon. This was a spine surgery. The guy was there through 3 shifts. So there's like 10 or 12 people in the room. An anesthesiologist, somebody who's monitoring the equipment, somebody who's monitoring the vitals and all this stuff, and this guy is doing the back surgery. He was the only person that stayed in the room for, I think, I left before he was done. So I was there all day, and he was there all day. And I left and he was still there and had 3 shifts of personnel and he was still there. And so I said, okay, now I understand why they get paid the big bucks. Because they even have to stop at one point because he was getting indigestion and, he had to sit down and they brought in Pepto-Bismol, took care of him so he could continue the surgery. It was wild.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how did that affect the product or the documentation?
Well, this was before I actually got started on a project.
Oh, okay.
This was just for me to get general information about what the surgical theater looked like and what was going on. And so it was really enlightening because, again, I had an impression based on TV that was completely wrong. So so that was a big thing. This is the whole business of understanding that there's multiple audiences. There's one person who does this, another person who does this, another person who does that, and you have to account for all those audiences. No one book is going to cover all those people.
Or the product itself,
Right.
and the graphic design and so on. Yeah, so it's about understanding how the product is used, who is using it, why they're using it,
Exactly.
and then putting it all together so they can accomplish their job.
Because even spine surgery, I didn't even understand what spine surgery meant and what they were doing. And I mean, for me, it was enlightening to find out that it's like woodworking. So the spine surgeon, it's all about, okay, if you have fusion surgery, they put these screws in your spine and then they wire the screws together to keep your spine together. And the way they do the screws is, they'll like take something like an awl and they punch a hole in your spine. And so they can start the screws. Now, modern surgery, this is all automated, but the surgery I watched, they were still doing it the old-fashioned way. The guy's taking a little hammer and pounding a little hole to get the screw started.
You're making me squeamish.
It was, like I said, I went there with another colleague, and he did have to leave, but I was fascinated. Okay. And because it was a teaching hospital, the surgeon could tell I was fascinating. So he put a little step stool up there and had me stand over the body to show me exactly what he was doing inside this person's body. It was very cool.
That's a cool experience.
Very cool. Yeah.
And all of that kind of gave you an idea of the environment.
Right.
So you knew how to write and you knew how to give feedback.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
So the product would be better to fit that environment.
And I gave them credit for it. Was almost a requirement for that job. They said, "Yeah, you got to go look at a surgery if you're going to work here." So, and it was really, like I said, it opened my eyes. So
now that's really cool.
Yeah.
So what other usability stories you can tell? Non-medical.
I'll leave that to you because I've been in medical devices now for 15 years, so that's all I know, right?
Well, I basically one of the things I did at one of the companies I worked at was instigated customer trips, to understand that environment. I mean, with medical, that was a requirement.
Yeah.
And in most cases, all other products, they don't require that at all.
Right.
And then give you one example. I was working on a network management tool that you may be well aware of. And they said, okay, I got into the group. They said, okay, you're going to be writing about this product. I'm going to put you down in front of the product, turn it on and see what you can do with it. I did nothing. I couldn't do a darn thing. The product was so unusable. I didn't even know where to start. There was nowhere to begin. So that was the initial feedback I gave. Just like, how do you work this thing?
And from my level, when I took over the management of that group that was working for that product, I sat down with the lead engineer and I said, okay, give me an idea of the day in the life of a network manager. And he stared at me like I had two heads. He had no idea. So here they are designing a product and they have no idea what their users do for a living.
Yep.
So
Though the engineering behind it was phenomenal. I mean, I give it kudos. I mean, it was way ahead of its time.
oh yeah, technology-wise, it was great.
But you couldn't use it.
Right. And again, the reason was because they really didn't know who that product was for. They had no conception of what a network manager did on a daily basis. So how are they going to create software for somebody that they don't know?
And that's when we started the customer visits.
Yeah.
And I said, we got to go out there. We got to see what they're doing. We figure out how they even getting it going. And honestly, when you sit down in front of a product, I mean, it's not a problem so much today. Everybody knows how to start an app, and it tells you what you need to do next.
Right.
Okay, back then, no, that didn't happen at all. If you didn't know how to start, you were hosed. You couldn't do a thing.
And in that product space, it was kind of funny because, again, I was a manager at the time. And knowing that they had a usability problem, I'm trying to figure out how to solve this problem. And so what I sold engineering is I said, look, you don't have any usability people here. You don't understand your product. My writers are probably closer to the user than you'll ever be. So maybe think of my writers as usability engineers. And that's kind of the role you ended up taking. You kind of forced them to start thinking about that stuff from a documentation perspective and from a user's perspective. But, and so in the end, they actually gave me budget to go out and hire a real usability engineer who would report to me. But then the company went kind of out of business before I could actually hire somebody. But I finally made enough noise that they actually gave me money to go pursue usability because they started to realize that they had a statistic that it took the typical user 5 years to become proficient with that tool. That's how bad it was. 5 years. Imagine if you got a cell phone and you couldn't figure out how to use it for 5 years.
If you can't use it for after 5 minutes,
Yeah, exactly.
it gets tossed.
So yeah, that was the bad old days of software design. It was all seat of the pants, you know.
Yeah, so these are some of the war stories that we have from our usability experiences. And the thing that we took away from that is that we really need to know our audience. We really need to know what each of them are doing. We need to know the environment in which they work. And we need to stay very focused on a task. I mean, a medical task, you had to be very clear, very efficient.
Right.
You couldn't waste any time.
Right.
And I was given a number of opportunities, or call them opportunities, but directives really from engineering or from customer support saying it's taken too long to install this product. How can we make, well, they came back to me and they'd say, how can you make the document shorter? And it's just like, well, it's not just a document. We need to make the installation more. And I'd work with the installer and we would just go back and forth on that. So this is how it evolved over time. These are all the usability things that we have gone through in the history of this. It is still a factor today.
And I will say that the thing about technical writing, and this is the reason I could sell technical writers as usability engineers, is that if you take a course in technical writing, they always talk about knowing your user, right? Engineers aren't taught that, right? They're all about the technology and making things work. It's not part of their training to know the user. But writers are trained that way.
I would say that was always the case. That's not always the case anymore.
Right.
More engineers are becoming more and more aware of their users.
Yeah, they have to.
Yeah. And so that's happening along.
Yeah.
So that is...
We're talking, what, 30 years ago? So this is a while ago. Yeah.
Oh, come on. You keep on bringing age and time into... it's just like, this is timeless. Really,
But it's an evolution. It's an
evolution.
It's absolutely an evolution.
So today we have a lot more user-friendly things.
Yes.
They can be user-friendly still. The battle isn't over yet. And that's where we come in and try to do the job. And that is what usability was, becoming user experiences. And that's how we got to where we are today.
And I will say, I'm going to give kudos to Apple because Apple was the first company that embarrassed. Because if you remember the bad old days of Windows, Windows was it took a little time to get used to Windows, and Apple actually started doing, paying a lot of attention to graphical user interfaces and making that like a selling point of their products, and then everybody else had to kind of follow suit.
Wow.
So that's part of what drove graphical user interfaces.
And cell phone technology, you have to get a lot of information into this little tiny space, and you can't do that too well.
Right. And you have to, and again, they're targeting naive users, people who never used phones before, never used a cell phone before. If you think about the old flip phone that I used to have and compare that to what we have now, yeah, it's an amazing transition.
So I think that concludes our usability stories for today. I'm sure we'll revisit it sometime in the future.
Yeah, it'll come up in everything we do. It comes up in everything we do all the time. Yeah.
It really is a huge topic.
Yeah.
It's how we think.
Yeah.
It's how we do our jobs. So saying that, I think that concludes it for today. So I would like to thank Sterling-Lancaster Community TV for recording us today. Thank you, Matt. And I think I'd like to state now the next topic is going to be what? Oh, learning from your mistakes. Okay, making mistakes, which is something that we've done. Surprisingly, some of you may not believe that, but we have made mistakes and we have learned from them.
That's right. We're not perfect, although we think we are.
Yeah, I still think so. But
yeah,
we'll talk about that next time. So this is Bob.
This is Archie.
Wishing you a good day.